Welcome. I'm Laura Peterson. This At the U at the Center series comes to you from the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Minnesota. OLLI is a learning community for people 50 plus who are curious, lifelong learners. We offer hundreds of non-credit courses a year, plus other ways to get involved, like special interest groups and volunteer opportunities. I myself am a volunteer for OLLI. I want to extend a warm welcome to our OLLI members who are on this webinar, as well as our guests. Today's presentation is titled Forever Green: New Crops and Products for a Sustainable Future. Dr. Donald Wise is unable to be with us today, but we are thrilled to have Dr. Mitch Hunter with us. Dr. Hunter is Associate Director of the Forever Green Initiative at the University of Minnesota, an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Agronomy and Plant Genetics. His postdoctoral research at the university focused on dual-use management of Kernza, intermediate wheatgrass, for forage and grain production. Mitch did his PhD in agronomy at Penn State, where he studied cover crop mixtures, climate resilience, and sustainable intensification. His parents raise organic grass-fed beef in Southeast Minnesota. Dr. Hunter, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Laura. All right, well, it's really great to be speaking with all of you. I see there's quite a number of folks on the line. That's exciting. I'm really passionate about the Forever Green Initiative and our work, and I'm just excited to share with all of you what we've been doing. I understand that my colleague, Dr. Don Wise, has presented to you all in the past, and so some of you might be familiar with what we've got going on. Some of this presentation might be a refresher for those folks, and I've also incorporated quite a bit of new stuff that we've been up to that's changed within the last year, and also some thinking about our future directions. So really excited to hear your Q&A. I think that they're probably going to be held to the end, although, just a note, I would be happy to stop along the way and answer questions if that's amenable to the moderators. So my title that I use is a little bit different. There's lots of different ways to talk about Forever Green Initiative. I think one of the simplest is to think about, we're developing a new generation of crops. And this is something that the University of Minnesota has done really for decades. We are responsible in many ways for almost all the crops that you're familiar with seeing on the Minnesota landscape in a big way: hybrid corn, wheat, at this point, spring wheat, and soybean being the most recent one that's gotten big. So there basically were no soybeans on the landscape as of the 30s into the 40s. The original varieties that the university took a look at only yielded about 15 or 16 bushels. Now we have varieties that'll yield 80 bushels or more, and soybeans make up 8 million or so acres of our farming landscape, which is on par with corn. So point being that it is possible for committed long-term research with the right partners to take a new crop and make it a real thing, even when it starts out looking like a long shot. And so that's germane, because what we're trying to do is develop the next generation of new crops, and not just new crops for stuff to eat or industrial products or any of those outcomes, although that is important. But we're thinking about crops that can provide more benefits than that. The biggest one is the environmental benefits. And so in many cases, these can be called clean water crops. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, the ways that they can benefit the water in our state and beyond. But there's a whole range of additional environmental benefits that they can provide, as well as being really helpful for rural communities, we think, having the ability to spark new industries, new businesses that can root here in Minnesota and give people a reason to move back to their hometown, meaningful work that makes a difference, and that you can build a life around. So that's all part of our vision at the Forever Green Initiative. We are based at the University of Minnesota. We are kind of a big consortium of researchers who are all working towards the same set of goals. And we have a lot of partners outside the university as well. So it's not just folks like me who are employed at the U. What we do is integrated research and commercialization, which is pretty unique. Obviously, universities are known for their research. In many cases, a lot of that research sits on the shelf, or it relies on somebody else to go pick it up and do something with it. We are taking a much more active approach, and have teams working to take our research, bring it out to the world, and make meaningful difference with it. And we do this in a very integrated way. Our focus is on two types of new crops: winter annual crops that you can plant in the fall and they grow over the winter, and perennial crops that, like your tree in your yard or the grass in your lawn, will come back every year. For the most part in Minnesota right now, we have annual crops, and they're super productive and can be profitable for farmers. Again, corn, soybeans, wheat, etc. And those are summer annuals. They grow from, maybe May or June into the fall, which just means that we have vulnerability through the rest of the year. What we are driving towards is a system where we have continuous living cover on the landscape. So all year round, even right now under the snow, you can have a living green plant just waiting to pop up and cover the ground and protect the soil when it warms up. But you can't just develop the crops. We need to do this in a way that produces new products that companies want to buy: food, feed, fuel, ingredients. That can give us new economic opportunities. And that is what is going to drive the ecosystem services or ecosystem benefits out on the landscape, because that's what's going to bring it to scale. A little bit more background on where we are. This is just a chart showing solar radiation or sunshine across the year and precipitation across the year. And if you map onto that, the way that our landscape looks, a few things become apparent. First of all, this is a satellite image showing the Midwest landscape, and the brown color indicates bare soil. So you can see that in April, soil is bare, and that's because most farmers have harvested their crops the previous fall, in many cases tilled the soil, and it's just sitting there waiting for the next crop to be planted. That persists well into May, and even into June to a certain extent, where we have limited plant cover into June, as corn and soybeans predominantly are still, those plants are getting big enough to fully cover the soil. After that, in the summer, we do a great job covering the soil. We have super productive plants. They're taking up nutrients. They are protecting the soil. They are sequestering carbon. Lots of things are happening. Lots of good things are happening when you have those green growing plants in the middle of the summer. But they are gone pretty quickly before we know it. October hits, harvest season, those plants are harvested. In many cases, not much residue is left behind. And like I said, in some cases, the soil is pretty quickly tilled again. So we have this period of the summer of 3 or 4 months where the soil is actually covered by growing plants. The rest of the time it's not, and that's a huge vulnerability. Those spring and fall months are the times when we have the most erosion and when we lose the most nutrients off of our soil. And in case that concept isn't familiar, nutrients, but I'm referring to nitrogen and phosphorus primarily. They're naturally occurring in soils, and farmers add additional nitrogen and phosphorus because plants need them to grow. So there's a very good reason, if any of you are gardeners, you probably put some compost or some manure or other kind of fertilizer on your beds, and a lot of the benefit there is from the nitrogen and phosphorus in it. But when there's too much of that, and when it's not being taken up by plants and instead is being lost, washed away, eroded off the surface, or washed down through the soil, it can get into the surface water, get into the groundwater, and cause real environmental problems. Some of those are shown here. So catastrophic soil erosion, all that soil being lost, silts in our rivers and our reservoirs and our lakes. So my parents farm near Lake Pepin, and that lake is filling in pretty rapidly. You also lose phosphorus in great quantities when you lose soil like this, and that can cause algal blooms. Bigger picture problems like hypoxia, which is where you have too much nitrogen and too much phosphorus showing up in a place like the Gulf of Mexico, although it happens many places, Lake Erie, Chesapeake Bay, even, that's when we have beach closures in Minneapolis. It's the same process going on. And that's from, again, too much nitrogen and phosphorus going down the waterways. And we see it in nitrate contamination in our drinking water wells. This map is showing across the state of Minnesota. The red dots are where there's been documented very high levels of nitrate, dangerously high, that are unhealthy for humans to drink. And the science shows that the vast majority of those issues are a result of agricultural activities. So we need to do something about this. We need to address these problems. And we think at the Forever Green Initiative that a huge part of the solution is to move from conventional farming practices to a continuous living cover approach. Here's a couple of examples. So on the top, this is an example from the fall. Again, many farm fields are tilled in the fall. They're plowed or plowed in some form, or a disc is run over them, so they turn to black dirt. And when you have black dirt and you get an inch of rainfall, this is what happens. You know, even on a small flat plot in the city, you can get erosion and soil moving off of that plot. Just next door to that plot, same rainfall, and this is with Kernza, one of our perennials. That water didn't go anywhere. The Kernza soaked it up. No soil was lost. Vastly different outcome. Different example from the spring. So here's a different research station, also in Minnesota. Typical April field prep, you see bare soil, you see dust in the background, soil's vulnerable to wind erosion and water erosion at that point, versus one of our crops, winter camelina, which is already green and growing, covering the soil in the month of April. And just from these two examples, you can see that we get less erosion, you can have less nitrate leaching, those plants are there taking up the nitrogen, less phosphorus loss, and better soil health. So huge benefits all around. Those two crops, Kernza and winter camelina, are just two of the over 15 crops that we are developing through the Forever Green Initiative. So we have a whole suite of perennials, Kernza being the kind of the leading edge, but we have different approaches to perennial sunflower, perennial flax, which is one of these crops that you would be able to plant in your garden. It's a beautiful blue flower. They flower from April to even November sometimes, or at least October, and just make a beautiful bedding plant. And at the same time, we're working on them as an actual crop that farmers would grow. We have alfalfa, which is a stalwart. It's the biggest perennial crop that we have. And we're working on new ways to expand the use of alfalfa and bring its benefits to a wider area. I won't go through all of them one by one, but you can see that we have a whole portfolio of perennial crops. We also have these winter annual crops that I mentioned that you plant in the fall. Winter camelina is what I just showed you. And pennycress, those two are kind of buddies. They're very similar. Oilseed crops that can produce oil that's equivalent to canola. So major markets for those that I'll get into later, and major environmental benefits, as well as winter barley. That's, you know, everybody knows what barley is, but we haven't been able to grow winter barley in Minnesota before until our breeders developed a much more winter hardy type. And that's going to create new opportunities. We're also really excited about winter pea. Pea is a legume. It fixes its own nitrogen so that farmers can get away from buying so much synthetic nitrogen. And it also produces a very high protein product, the pea, that is now in much, much greater demand, not just for pea soup, but more for processed pea products, like if you've heard of Beyond Burger or Impossible Foods, those alternative meat products are often using pea protein these days. Finally, our last category is native woody crops. And there we have hazelnuts. So everybody knows hazelnuts. If you eat Nutella, if you eat Ferrero candies, or, you know, like your hazelnut coffee, well, most of those hazelnuts are grown in Europe or Turkey. Some of them are grown in Oregon. That's the biggest producer in the US. We are working on developing a Midwest hazelnut industry that's based on native upper Midwest germplasm. So native plants from here contributing key traits that are going to make that work. We're also working to promote the growth of and commercialization of elderberry. Elderberry is one of these superfoods, very high in antioxidants, beautiful blue color, jams, jellies, shrubs, drinks, all kinds of things can be made with elderberry. And one of the common themes around all these is that they all can provide new stuff that people are going to want to buy. And that's really critical. Farming is a private industry. The choices that farmers make are understandably driven by their ability to make a buck, because if they can't make a buck, they lose their farm, they lose their livelihood. So we need to put options out there that can help those farmers be profitable and lead towards good environmental outcomes. So our crops can produce oils, fiber, protein, phytonutrients that can go in obviously food, also industrial products, feed for livestock, even pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, cosmetics in those high value markets. And all this adds up to new economic opportunities, both for the farmer, but also for small businesses that can take these products and build industries around them, and for big businesses that are working to do things like reduce their carbon footprint. And they need new tools to allow them to do that. We think our crops are really well suited to meeting that need. Just to give you an example of, this is not all pie in the sky. We have real products out there, and I'll show some of the newer ones later, but we have bread products, pasta products, cereal. This cereal is Cascadian Farm. That's a General Mills company. So big scale. That's on grocery store shelves across the country. We also have small startups like Perennial Pantry, based down in Northfield. They're developing a whole bunch of awesome new products, pasta, crackers, etc. So these things are real. We're working very hard to make them real, so they can go make a difference. Big picture, how do we do it? How do we get them on the landscape? Well, we do research and we collaborate across both the private and public sectors. And we really try to be sequenced and comprehensive, soup to nuts, basically. We start with basic plant breeding and genomics, developing these crops, making them work better for farmers. Then we bring in our agronomists. That's my background. I'm an agronomist. We know how to take a new crop and figure out how to make it work in a system. How do you plant it? How do you fertilize it? How do you manage it? How do you get a good yield on it? And at the same time, that's all integrated with soil and water science so that we're managing it in a way that improves soil health, that improves water quality. Then we take the grain off of those trials and we give it to our friends in food science and bioproducts. And they help figure out, how do you cook with this stuff? How do you make a good dough? How do you puff it into something that could go into a snack food? Or how do you ferment it and take what would be a waste product, let's say, and turn it into something much higher value for feed or for food? So we do all this integrated science, and then we have a whole commercialization team that does outreach to companies and supply chain development so that you can have a farmer grow it, somebody pick it up, they process it, they get it ready for a food company to use, and they can make a product out of it. If you don't have all those pieces in the chain, it's not going to work. And so we are very intentional about putting it together in that way. Tell you a little bit more about that side of things, the commercialization side of things. Really what we're doing is to take these new crops and systems across what people call the valley of death. And this is a really common concept in technology innovation spaces. It's easy to come up with a good idea. I come up with like 10 a day and none of them will ever become a business because they just don't have the juice. But come up with a good idea, do the science behind it, do the R&D, develop a technology. Maybe you find somebody, a company that wants to work with it. They launch a product, okay? And then that product has a lot of hurdles to overcome before that business and that product really succeed. That's where you have this valley of death, where there's just, you have to educate people about what it is, how it works for them, figure out the right price, all the supply chain logistics, regulatory pieces. There's so many elements that go into making a new technology or new product succeed. We face all of those with our new crops. And so we have this commercialization team that is working actively to shepherd our crops across this valley of death so they can go out and be a success. Some of the things this team does, a lot of strategy, capacity, so building out the capacity of all these systems to move forward, brokering resources of a wide variety of types, and also working on policy and systems. And I'll just give you a few examples of what this looks like. So on the strategy front, these winter oilseeds that I mentioned, the pennycress and camelina. In 2022, we went from thinking that they might make some good salad oil to thinking, to realizing that there's a massive potential in these crops for sustainable aviation fuel, sustainable biofuels in general. Aviation is a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions. There aren't very many good alternatives. It's hard to put a battery on a plane that's big enough that can fly you to New York City. So we're probably going to be reliant on liquid fuels for aviation for quite a while. Where are those liquid fuels going to come from? How can we make them low carbon? Well, all of a sudden people realize that something like a winter oil seed, it grows in the winter, it's pretty low input, pretty high yielding, and it does not displace the other crops. So you don't have to, if you put soybeans, you can make jet fuel out of soybeans, but there's a huge demand for soybeans. So if you do that with 1 million gallons of soybean oil, somebody's going to go plant the soybeans to make up that 1 million gallons. That's got its own huge source of emissions associated with it. That problem does not apply to these new winter crops. They grow over the winter. They do not displace your regular crops. And so all of a sudden, there's this huge interest in taking these oil seeds and making them basically the biofuel of the future. And so out of the blue, this cropped up, and this team, our team, was on the scene to figure out, what does this mean? How do we navigate all these different conversations with all these different organizations? How do we negotiate a partnership with some of them that's going to be good for water quality, good for sustainable aviation, good for the university and the taxpayer that supported this? All of those questions, very challenging strategic questions. Another part of what this team does is making the case. And so done a lot of piloting. This is Ben Penner, one of the farmers we've worked with. We've developed a report on the economics of this crop, winter camelina, just to put information out there, good solid information that help farmers make decisions and companies make decisions, but also show the potential of this and make the case for it. Also, business and market development. These are just some of the companies that we've had conversations with in the last handful of years, that some of them have already created products like General Mills. Albert Lee Seed has been a great partner of ours on the seed supply to farmers. Patagonia has been making stuff with Kernza for just about longer than anyone. And there's a lot of others on here too that have potential, both Minnesota-based, like General Mills, Rahr Malting, Cargill, and Embold's not a company; it's a consortium of industry, but that's also Minnesota-based and beyond, across the whole country, and we're even working with some international partners too. Another part of the capacity that we bring is to spark entrepreneurship. So here are two organizations that did not exist just a few years ago, but exist now because of the work that we've done to develop crops and put them out in the world. One is the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative. That's a farmer co-op where they are dedicated entirely to promoting crops like Kernza and other forever green crops that fit that mission and the vision of a perennial landscape. Perennial Pantry is another one. They are a food maker. As you can see at the bottom, they have a whole range of foods. If you want to try this crop Kernza, there's lots of ways to do it. That's a really good one. You can go to their website. You can order products from them, flours, crackers. The crackers are amazing. Pasta and other things. So the ability to spark and bring in committed people who are going to bring their own passion, their own resources, their ideas to the table to move these forward is really, really critical. Another important piece is policy innovation. It's not going to happen without supportive policy, period. So, and that policy is not going to come out of nowhere. So this team has developed two very critical, this part of Forever Green has developed two very critical, innovative policy proposals that are helping move this forward. One of them is the ECO program. That ECO stands for Economic and Environmental Clusters of Opportunity. Okay, so it's about being strategic, bringing our resources together in the areas that really need it, and focusing not just on the environmental benefits, but the economics too. And so that's a way of de-risking adoption for farmers and supporting their adoption, giving them some environmental benefit payments, and giving them a backstop if everything goes haywire. The second one, which just launched, is run by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And this one is more focused on the businesses. So the first one is for the farmers. This one is for the businesses, small to medium businesses that are just trying to figure out how to build a supply chain with these crops. So maybe they need a new processing line to work with Kernza, or they need a new cracker making machine, or they need to do some market research to figure out, how do we build a product that consumers are really going to love using camelina or using winter barley. And those are, so those are just two examples of how we've been able to put new policy in place that's going to support the adoption of all these crops. With that, I will transition and start to give you kind of an overview of a couple of our flagship crops, Kernza, intermediate wheatgrass, and pennycress and camelina, the oil seeds. So This is a good time to take questions. I don't know if that's up to me or if that's up to the moderators, but I am happy to take questions now if that is all right with moderators.
Sure, that's just fine. We have several questions already, Mitch. Will you be addressing sources of funding for this research?
I can do that quickly now. So the base funding and the reason that we exist is that we've received really generous funding from the state of Minnesota. So all of you as taxpayers have supported this work, and that has mostly come through the Clean Water Fund. We've also gotten, and which is supported by the sales tax amendment, and we've also got some funding from the what's called LCCMR, or in short, the lottery funds that go to conservation. So that has given us a base that's allowed us to get started and pull teams together. What we've done is to pull together people on campus who are working on other stuff but had the expertise, put them together into a team and say, okay, now you're all going to work on Kernza. You're all going to work on winter pea. So we get these leading experts in their fields to come together, leverage their expertise, give them a little bit of seed money to get started. And then we've been successful leveraging those funds by 5 or even 10 times in some cases with federal money. So we've gotten multiple $10 million federal grants that have built on the more modest money that we've gotten from the state over the years. And at the end, I'll talk about the new research funding that we're hoping to receive from the state this time around.
Okay.
That addresses your question.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. Here's another question. Your colleague, Jim Anderson, has developed a new variety of conventional wheat. How does the yield of Kernza compare to Professor Anderson's new wheat variety?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So Jim Anderson he's kind of the, he wears a lot of hats for us in Forever Green. He is the conventional spring wheat breeder, as well as overseeing the Kernza breeding program and the Camelina and Pennycrest breeding program. So very central figure. And in general, Kernza yields in the first year of the stand are 1/4 to 1/3 of wheat yields. That is the big challenge of Kernza, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It's not surprising. It's a perennial grass. Those are not known for having high seed yield. And so we have a lot of work to do to keep bringing those yields up. We have been bringing them up about 10% for every breeding cycle. So that's pretty rapid progress. That's faster progress on a percent basis than Jim is able to make on spring wheat, because we've been breeding spring wheat for so long that we've already made quite a bit of good progress. It's harder to make those next gains. Whereas Kernza, it's easy to make those next gains. The other challenge with Kernza is that the yield, the first year declines into the second year and into the third year. So it's a perennial, it's very hardy, but the grain yields tend to drop. And that's another piece that we're working on through the breeding program.
We have a ton more questions, Mitch. So I don't know if you want to stop and work on those now or go back to your presentation and finish up with the questions later.
Maybe I should keep going.
Okay.
I'm seeing more and more questions come in as I answer them. So
okay,
I'll keep going, and I'll just make sure to save time at the end for plenty of questions.
Sounds good.
All right, so let's get into intermediate wheatgrass, also known as Kernza. Kernza is North America's, let me just go back one. It's North America's first commercially viable perennial grain, and we're developing it in very close partnership with the Land Institute, which is based in Salina, Kansas. It's a perennial grass. It's not developed from wheat. It's a perennial grass that was native to Eurasia. It's kind of the Caucasus region. And it's been grown in the United States as a forage for about 80 years. So it's been used in the US. But it was about 40 years ago that the Rodale Institute identified it as a potential perennial grain. They evaluated, I think, about 300 different species and said, hey, the seeds are pretty big, the yields are pretty good. It tends to stand up in the field so you can harvest it. Let's start working on this crop. The really exciting thing about this plant is the root system. So here we have a comparison of intermediate wheatgrass, Kernza, with annual wheat. And this is 1-year-old Kernza. So it only takes 1 year for Kernza to grow a root that is 10 feet deep. And that root system is maintained over time throughout the whole life cycle, the whole year. And it's deep and dense, and basically one giant sponge for taking up nutrients, taking up nitrogen and phosphorus, and it's made of carbon. So that's putting carbon that deep into the soil where it's very resistant to being broken down. On the other hand, you have typical winter wheat, small spindly roots, harvested in June, and then it's gone, and those roots die. They're all in the upper meter where they're much more likely to be lost. That carbon is more likely to be lost to the atmosphere. So really huge potential for water quality, soil health, carbon sequestration. We've documented very clearly this water quality benefit. Here on the left, you're seeing over the growing season, soil water nitrate levels. And with corn, it's pretty typical to see it up here in this 45 to 60 parts per million range. And then as the plant gets going in June and July, it starts to draw it down, but that's very high. That's much higher than 10. I should have this on the slide, but 10 is the safe drinking water level. Kernza, in contrast, never gets above 10. That plant is gonna green up and start growing immediately once the snow finally melts out there, and it will be growing all the way through the fall. And so it's just does an excellent job. We've seen this result in study after study that basically no nitrogen makes its way past Kernza. And we've done this work strategically around the state in collaboration with drinking water management areas, especially where they're having water quality challenges. At the Central Lakes College, in Cold Spring, Lincoln Pipestone in Egerton, and Chatfield. And especially in Egerton, they think they're seeing, well, they're definitely seeing big improvements in the quality of the water at their water treatment plant, which saves them money. And they think that they can attribute a lot of that to Kernza, not only stopping nitrate from going down, but potentially even pulling it back up from a shallow water table. Very exciting. To make it real, though, to address that question that was asked and make this viable into the future, we know we need to make improvements. And we have pretty good track record so far. So we're trying to get this plant so it doesn't shatter. That means the seeds stick to it and that they stay there. When you drive through the field with a combine, you're going to get the seeds in the bin of the combine instead of just knocking them off and they're all laying on the ground and you've lost them. So that's a really critical trait. The next trait is threshability. So all of these grains have holes on them. Nobody wants to eat those holes, and it's work to get those holes off. It'd be much better if the holes would fall off on their own like they do for your typical wheat. And our breeders are moving rapidly in that direction of 90+% threshability, as it's called. The other thing is improving seed size. So here you just have some examples of different Kernza lines on the left with traditional wheat on the right. We're doing okay on length, but not so well on width and volume. The weight of those seeds is quite a bit smaller. So we need to make progress, but we have a good track record again of moving in that direction. And that has allowed us to release the very first ever Kernza variety in the world, which we called MN Clearwater. That was released in 2019, 2020. It's been out there for a few years now, performing quite well for the farmers who've used it. Just some quick stats. There's about 6,000 acres of total license, 6,000 total licensed acres in the country, and roughly 1,500 to 2,000 of those are in Minnesota. That adds up, we think, to about $1 million in upper Midwest grain sales, which of course translates to quite a few millions more in product sales that have used that Kernza. And we have 3 different seed companies that are licensed to provide that seed to farmers. Just some pretty pictures here too of different things that food makers have created: bread, pasta, salads, and cookies that all look delicious. More on Kernza. Again, I already talked a bit about the Perennial Promise Growers Co-op. They recently incorporated. They've got, I think, closer to 50 or more members now. They've got a marketing team, co-op bylaws. They've raised their first $100,000, both from their own members and from CoBank. And they're trying to figure out what's the business model for this co-op that's going to help them responsibly, sustainably scale up Kernza across the landscape. And they are, for us, a really, really critical partner. We work together on grants and other things. Another one is Perennial Pantry. Also mentioned it earlier. They've got a whole range of products: the grain, 100% Kernza flour, a flour blend, because 100% Kernza works well for some things, but for a lot of things, it's better to blend it with some traditional wheat flour to get, you get the flavor benefits of Kernza. You of course get the safe sustainability benefits, and you get a product that looks closer to what you're used to getting. Let's say if you're trying to make bread, but they've got 100% Kernza crackers. They've got pasta that I think is 100% Kernza. a whole range of things, and they're constantly innovating. They've actually got this thing called the perennial share. So if you know what a CSA is, community supported agriculture, where you get a box of veggies every week, this is that, but for Kernza-based pantry products. They're trying to make this a staple food in our diets, not just something fancy that you sprinkle on top. So that's a really, really exciting work going on in that company. Just in the last month or so, we've seen major new product launches from the very local to the very national. So Finnegan's Brewing Company, they just released their first Kernza beer. There's a lot of other breweries around the cities that have Kernza beer already and beyond. Bang Brewery is kind of the original there and still a great partner. Kodiak Cakes, another national brand, just released Kodiak Kernza Cakes, flapjack and waffle mix. So that's exciting. Cascadian Farm is a General Mills company. It's a brand of theirs, and they just released a baking blend flour that is on shelves, not only in Whole Foods, but also in Walmarts around the country. It actually costs a lot more in the Walmart than the Whole Foods, so riddle me that one. But that's a huge, exciting result for us, that putting Kernza on Walmart shelves has been kind of a standard out there that we didn't know if we would ever meet, and it didn't take us that long to get there. And then finally, Sturdy Wheat, which is a very local brand based out of Red Wing. They are run by a person who's deeply concerned about water quality. They're right there on Lake Pepin, Mississippi River, and I guess north of Lake Pepin, but right on the river. And there's a lot of sediment and nutrients that flow right by their doorstep. So they see incorporating Kernza into one of their products as a way to contribute to solving that problem. So again, lots of exciting things going on in the Kernza world. Next, I'll jump into Camelina and pennycress. Kind of treat them side by side because they're very similar. They are both extremely hardy winter annuals. They're oil seeds. The seeds they produce are very small but mighty because they are about 40% or 35 to 40% oil. And vegetable oil is in high demand and short supply right now globally for a whole wide range of reasons, including this new boom in renewable jet fuel and renewable diesel is just amping up that demand even further. So pennycress, originally, you might have pulled it out of your garden. It's a weed. It's a widely distributed weed native to Eurasia that's all across the world now because it's such a darn good weed. But we've, in the last decade, domesticated it to where it's no longer a weed. It does not create a seed bank. It germinates rapidly. It's got, it does not shatter. So again, the seed pods stay on the plant. And the oil quality is now better for a whole wide range of uses. Camelina, on the other hand, has been a crop for thousands of years. It's been an oilseed crop. It was kind of the oilseed crop in Europe until rapeseed or canola took over. And it's already heart healthy, very edible, high antioxidants, very shelf stable, but it also has the same potential for fuel and for industrial uses. And when you press both of these oils, get that 40% oil out, the other 60% is left over, and that's a very high protein meal that can be used as animal feed. And we hope we can find ways to make it suitable for human food use as well. The really exciting and interesting thing about this crop is how we grow it. Like I said, it's a winter annual. So to make that work financially, there's two ways you can do it. One, you can just plant it in the fall, harvest it in July, and find something that you can plant in the middle of July that's gonna work for you as a farmer. And that's a really hard challenge. Not gonna have a lot of options there on a big scale. So to make it more viable and make it fit better with the crops that are already common, we do something that's called relay cropping. Not very common, but a pretty exciting approach to it. So we will plant these oil seeds in the fall after a small grain like wheat or after silage corn potentially. And they'll be up and growing, making small plants by November. They will go to sleep under the snow and just wait for spring and then jump. We're waiting for them to jump this year when the snow melts. So previous year by April 18th, you had this very strong green cover on the soil. By May 31st, those plants are flowering. And a couple weeks later, you're able to harvest them because they're mature. So what you see here is you harvest it on June 17th, and then wait a minute, on July 6th, there's already this nice, pretty dense, healthy row of soybeans. How is that possible? Well, it's possible because we have already seeded those soybeans into the pennycress or the camelina. That happens at this step. So you've got a green cover, and we leave strips in the field. It's kind of hard to see those strips here, but we leave strips in the field. We plant soybean into those strips. It grows up and stays pretty small until you harvest the oil seed. And then once you get it off of there, that soybean is primed and ready to take off and grow. So that is a really innovative, cool system, an innovative way to get two crops in the same year. And what we see when you do those two crops in the same year, you get a lot more oil. You get more seed, even though the soybean doesn't yield quite as high when it's started out under the camelina or pennycress. But you get way more oil, 50% more oil, because those oil seeds are so high in oil. And that oil is really a major thing driving demand right now. So cool economically, potentially very beneficial for farmers, and also really valuable environmentally. Here's another graph showing nitrate in leachate. So that basically means nitrate that could find its way down to groundwaters. After some conventional till and no-till, I believe corn and soybean plots, radish as a cover crop, and then comparing to winter rye. Winter rye as a cover crop is the gold standard for taking up nitrogen, just soaks it up, very aggressive. And what we're showing is that pennycress and camelina are just as good. So these profitable crops that you can grow something and produce from are also providing those environmental benefits. And there's a lot of acres already in the state of Minnesota where these crops could go. So 1.5 million acres of spring wheat, that sets up perfectly for planting these crops. 400,000 acres of corn silage, also very strong. Sugar beets, a little bit more challenging, but potential. And then a lot of these smaller crops, oats, dry beans, sweet corn, pea, potato, all of those have potential for planting the oil seeds, adding up to 2 to 3 million acres where they could be deployed essentially today and have that impact. And we're working to make it possible to do it in a corn soybean rotation as well. There's some challenges. Those plants are harvested later in the season, especially, corn is harvested late and has a lot of residue. So there's challenges, but we're working on it. How did we get here? Well, we used some pretty impressive science led by a gentleman named David Marks. And what he's been able to do in his lab with all their collaborators are reduce shatter. So this is specifically for pennycress. Like I said, it was a weed. One of the things that makes a good weed is to have your seed spray everywhere. You want to get that seed out into the world, which is the opposite of what we want as farmers, right? And so we want to keep those seeds on the plant. And David found a mutant that had a different gene that enabled it to hold onto those seeds. Same thing with glucosinolates. Glucosinolates are actually a precursor to cyanide. If you've ever pulled up garlic mustard from your yard, you're smelling a glucosinolate. And that's also found in pennycress because they're in the same plant family. But again, David found a mutation that drastically reduces the glucosinolates, and also mutations that make the oil essentially equivalent to canola, high oleic, low urusic acid, so essentially heart healthy, good for omega-3s, omega-6s, and essentially ready to go and be used for human consumption. I've kind of already talked about this context. Everybody wants oil seeds for sustainable aviation and climate mitigation in agriculture. And so we're having conversations with just a huge range of organizations. The value proposition is more oil, more profit, low carbon fuels, a wide range of end use applications, as well as these ecosystem services that we think we can deliver. So I'm going to keep moving just so we have time for questions. Getting to the end here of what I've got to present. So just wanted to share some progress. This is not all new since the last time Don presented, but largely new. Like I said, we released the first variety of Kernza, Clearwater, and that was back in 2019. We just had a discussion about the next ones coming down the pike. There might be a new one next year, and then there will definitely be a new one within 2 to 3 years because our breeder has some lines that are higher yielding, very, very free threshing, so the hulls don't hang on. Lots of benefits that farmers are going to like, and that'll be out just within the next 2 to 3 years. Last year, we launched our very first variety of winter barley called MN Equinox, and we sold out in the first year. So there's a lot of interest among farmers in trying these new crops. We're talking to maltsters in the state to figure out, is there a way that we can, develop enough volume of this so they can malt with it and build products around it. We also launched a hardier version of hairy vetch. Probably not a plant that everybody's heard of, but hairy vetch is a great nitrogen fixing legume for gardening, for farming, especially organic farming. And it's probably the best nitrogen fixer we have, but it has been a little bit iffy in terms of winter hardiness for Minnesota. So we now have a much more winter hardy variety, and that's out there in the market too. Our first perennial flax variety is being evaluated for the horticultural market. Like I said, that's one that you might be able to plant in your garden. It makes beautiful blue hedges, heavily, densely flowered with great pollinator resources. That's the thing I forgot to say about the oil seeds. They both flower early in the spring, and those flowers are very attractive to pollinators at a time when there aren't many flowering plants on the landscape. So that's a big benefit. We're working on getting our first generation hazelnut plants out there. If you are excited about hazelnuts and you want to go buy a plant right now, it's pretty much a crapshoot on whether it's any good for actually producing nuts, because it's a seedling. We don't know what the genetics are, basically wild plants. Well, pretty soon we're going to be putting plants out in the marketplace that we know are good because we've evaluated them very carefully over a large number of years. Good, high quality nuts, high yields, etc. So that's really exciting. Trying to build an industry around hazelnuts to bring all the benefits of agroforestry. And then we have a winter camelina line that matures about a week earlier than traditional winter camelina. Very important for that relay system where we're trying to get the soybean started, give it a head start. The earlier we can harvest the winter camelina or pennycress, the better. So that's a big advance. And we have multiple lines of pennycress with all those traits that I talked about and even more stacked up in them. So they have everything that they need to go out and be a really viable crop. So that's the progress we've made and some about where we're heading. Just want to address something that's going on right now that's pretty exciting. We have partners. We're university employees. We don't go lobby. We can't, but we have partners who connect us with policymakers and give us the opportunity to tell our story. We've found some very supportive policymakers who've been able to put bills forward to continue supporting us. So we are included for $6 million, a recommendation for $6 million from the Clean Water Fund. Again, that's from the sales tax, the legacy amendment. And that would be the most we've ever received. I think 2 years ago, we got about $4 million. So a nice increase, shows real support. And then basically for the first time, we also have bills that are requesting funding for us to support research and to take that grant program I mentioned that supports private businesses and stabilize it and increase it. So this slide is from the House hearing where I was presenting on these bills. In the House, our authors are Ginny Cleaborn and Jeff Brand. In the Senate, it's Senator Seeberger, Judy Seeberger, and Heather Gustafson. And we have support from the chairs of those agriculture committees as well. So I'll just walk really briefly through these two bills so you know what's out there. Of course, if you're supportive, we'd love to have you contact your legislator and let them know. But that is up to you all. So the base research funding, like I said, we've been getting research money. It's mostly gone to research projects, which are excellent, critical, but a lot of this comes back to the people, not me, the people who are in the greenhouses, working with microscopes, sequencing DNA, making crosses, evaluating them in the field, doing field studies, measuring water quality, the researchers who are getting all of this done. And a few of those folks are tenured faculty members, they're fine. But a lot of them are non-tenured research faculty, graduate students, postdocs, people whose support is not stable. Even some of our most critical breeders are in that position where they have unstable funding. And we need to stabilize those people if we are going to be successful in the long run. Really good people are unlikely to stick around. And we have great people, we need good people. So we need to be able to provide them stability to stay with us and keep making progress. Breeding plants is not a short-term game, it's a long-term game. We need that long-term support to be able to do it. So what this base funding would do would enable us to stabilize funding for those breeders, also support management of the initiative, graduate students, postdocs, technicians, other research expenses, but really the main thing is going to be stabilizing the breeders and a couple of other key positions. We also, in that same bill, are requesting funding for equipment and infrastructure. So we have a lot of stuff. We were able to get it done. We can bootstrap it together, but in many cases, we could be more efficient, more effective. We could move faster and make more discoveries if we were able to fill some gaps in terms of our equipment and infrastructure. We're all about winter hardiness. All these plants have to survive a Minnesota winter if they're going to work in our program. And yet we only have one chamber where we can do freeze testing, where we can do a controlled environment, don't have to wait for the winter and the whole 6-7 months of it. We can, in a month or so, test in a lab, in a greenhouse, how freeze tolerant these plants are. We need more of those sorts of resources. And that's the other part of this bill. I think I already touched on that. The other bill, the bill for supporting entrepreneurs, would be grants to help private businesses take our crops from the lab to the marketplace. So none of these dollars would come to the university. They would all go to private businesses. This would be administered by the Department of Agriculture and focused on the 4 crops pictured here: kernza, hazelnuts, winter camelina, and elderberry. And this is actually, there's already a pilot version. It's open right now. So the idea was started in 2021, inspired by the Renewable Development Fund, which has helped invest in renewable energy businesses in Minnesota, accelerate renewable energy, and created a ton of jobs along the way. Got $500,000 in the last biennium, the previous session. That's allowed us to create a pilot, but we know that the demand and the need is going to far outstrip those $500,000 worth of funds. And so this bill would take it to the next level and help root these industries in Minnesota, help them break through their bottlenecks as an organization, as a company, accelerate their growth. It would lead to jobs in rural communities and help build demand for our crops. So this is just, again, a few examples of the types of crops and products that we envision coming out of this work. I will say that we just yesterday had 3 state senators on campus for 3 or 4 hours, showing them everything about Forever Green, our crops, our greenhouses, our researchers. We fed them some of these products, and we just wanted to make sure that they really understand what they're supporting when they put funding for us in these bills. The good news is that both of these bills are included in both the House and the Senate agricultural omnibus bills. We are in both bills are in both. That is exactly where we want to be. Maybe some of you might be following this, most of you not. In the big budget target with the big budget surplus for the state of Minnesota, agriculture got about this much out of that big budget surplus. Far, far less than we were hoping, than most people were hoping in the agriculture community, even far less than the ag committees were hoping for. And so, the money that they're able to provide, we're extra grateful for, because there wasn't much of it. And also we wish there were more of it, because we know the need is greater. So stay tuned. We'll see if there's any way as the session goes on that they're able to bring more money over to these bills. But again, these people serve at your pleasure. And if you think that these are good investments for the state to be making, I'd encourage you to reach out and let them know. With that, that's all I have. Thank you so much. I see a lot of questions. I'm excited to get into it. I can tell this is a very curious and responsive group, and that's exciting. So let's do questions.
All right, Mitch, thanks. What is your projected time frame, all things being granted to you that you need in order to reach that success mark on your timeline and get past the valley of death?
Mm-hmm. That's a key question, and it's going to be different for every crop. You've seen a lot of kernza in this presentation. That's the crop that's been able to be commercialized first. And so it's probably deepest in that valley of death, even though it looks like it's got the most going on. That's sitting right there in that valley of death, where we don't know if these are going to be blips and then things fade out, or if we're going to be looking back in 20 years with the founders of Perennial Pantry and Perennial Promise Growers Co-op and our friends at General Mills and our friends at Patagonia, et cetera, and saying, wow, we've really come a long way. This was a huge success. We don't know the answer to that. And so it's hard to put a timeline on it. I think Kernza is far enough along that, if it's still got a lot of momentum in 5 years, I'll have good confidence that it's going to be around in 20 years. But some of them are going to be on a different timeline. Like the oil seeds weren't really not a lot of talk about commercial activity 2 years ago. And at this point, with the players who are interested, the big companies who see the potential, we're talking 1 million+ acres in 5 years. And that would be a huge mark of success. It's super aggressive, but it's a real possibility. So, I'm not going to go down the line. Hazelnuts are never going to be on 1 million acres of Minnesota. Don't shoot me for saying that, but it's really hard to imagine scaling that industry to that level without some really aggressive changes in policy, economics, the technology to harvest it, things that we're all working on, but they're more likely to be on the order of tens of thousands of acres, and that would be a huge success in its own right. And again, is going to happen on its own time scale. So it's really hard to put a timeline towards success. What we want to see is progressively better crops, more supportive policy, more companies that are innovating and figuring out how to make these work. All those building blocks continuing to fall into place, building that momentum, and then ultimately seeing the impacts on farmers, on communities, on the water, et cetera. It's continually doing better is what we're trying to do, I would say.
What about teff? Does teff grow in Minnesota?
Teff can be grown in Minnesota. Teff is an example of something that could be a nice complement to some of our crops. So teff is an annual and has some good characteristics. It's gluten-free. I'm gluten sensitive, so I like teff. A lot of our stuff is not. Unfortunately, Kernza is not gluten-free. The other thing about teff is I believe it's a pretty short growth cycle. And that's something that can complement well. So if you grow winter barley, winter camelina, winter pea, and you harvest it around midsummer, you have to have something, like I said, to grow the rest of the year. Double cropping with soybeans is probably going to be the best bet for most big farmers. But there's a lot of other options too. Dry beans, there's already a good dry bean industry in Minnesota. They're pretty short. They don't take a lot of time to get to maturity. Things like teff, things like short-term forages like sorghum Sudan grass can work. Millet is another specialty grain that can be grown. And we've done some of these studies. We know that there are viable options. The problem is that the markets for those are really tiny, generally speaking. So you need to have a farmer who's willing to work with those niche markets, who also has the equipment to harvest some of those alternative crops. And, those are all pathways, but they're going to be a little bit more bespoke, a little bit more unique to the individual farmer or the region or the circumstance that makes them possible.
So what is in Kernza for the consumer? Is it better tasting? Is it more protein? Is it going to be cheaper? What is the benefit?
Good question. So I've talked to a lot of people. We go to the state fair every year. I'll make a plug. If you go to the state fair, come to the Ag Hort building, and in the CFAN section, we have a whole big display. So you can see a lot of this stuff in the flesh, hold the products, touch the seeds, come by. And last year I was tabling at the state fair. A woman came up and said, I love Kernza. I love putting it in all of my spice spreads, my coffee cake or banana bread, anything that has those rich spices are so much better with Kernza. And I was just yesterday with these legislators, we had Beth Dooley. Beth Dooley is a well-known food writer, chef, author. She's on the radio a lot, and she's a good friend of ours. She loves all these products. She was just raving about how great Kernza is, and she made these Kernza bars with elderberry jam compote on top. And everybody, I couldn't eat them. I was very sad because everyone around me eating them was just kind of like melting and swooning over how good they are. So yes, Kernza can be very delicious. Now, if you take that advice and you go home and you take Kernza flour and you try to 100% swap it in for your favorite recipe, whatever it might be, you might not have that experience. It does take a little bit of additional thinking, knowledge, understanding to use it well. Like I said, in many cases, we'll blend it 25% Kernza, 75% wheat, or 50-50. There's actually a lot of great recipes for baking with Kernza on the website of Perennial Pantry. They've done a lot of kind of crowdsourced citizen science to find out how to do it well. So, it's not perfect. It has some challenges. It doesn't rise well. It has gluten, but less gluten, so it doesn't rise well as traditional flour. So it's better for shortbreads, graham type breads, bars, that sort of thing. Pancakes are very good with it. So yeah, flavor's definitely a benefit if you use it right. Also health. It is very high in fiber, very high in protein, very high in nutrients. So micronutrients, that sort of thing, antioxidants. So it's a pretty healthy grain, much healthier than a white flour would be, or even a whole wheat flour. Price is not one of the positive attributes right now. It's priced quite a bit higher. That's driven in part by the low yields, driven in part by the novelty, and there's just not much of it out there. So if you want to try it, which I hope you do, consider it a treat. See what you can do with it. See if you like it. And I'd say the last benefit is you're doing something good for the world. And we know that consumers more and more want that out of their products, out of what they shop for and buy, reduce their own carbon footprint, help clean up the water. People want to feel good about their products that they're buying, and you definitely can when you're buying Kernza. So I think those are the main benefits.
Okay, so since it has this long root, is it hard to remove from the fields?
Hasn't been a problem. You don't have to yank out the whole root. We found various ways to kill the plant. So conventional farmers could spray it with a herbicide. Organic farmers can't do that, wouldn't do that. They find ways to terminate it. If you use a moldboard plow, no problem at all. A lot of our farmers are big conservationists and don't want to use a moldboard plow, but they find that if they just disc it at the right time, break up those crowns essentially, that it will die out. So it hasn't been a problem to kill. And related question, people wonder if it's going to get down there and clog up their drainage pipes. So many farm fields in Minnesota are tile drained to move the water off in the spring and make it easier to get in there and farm. And there are issues. Certain plants will clog them up. We haven't seen that so far with Kernza for whatever reason. So we think that maybe some roots get down in there, but it's in the soil for 3 to 4 years typically. It's a perennial, but since the yields decline, farmers will turn it over after a few years. So it's not going to be in there forever. And once it dies, those roots will start to break down. And again, we haven't seen a problem.
Oh, so where can the location of these crops, where are they being grown? Where is the experimentation happening?
We're doing it all over. So University of Minnesota has research stations from Roseau to Crookston, to Morris, to Lamberton, to Waseca, to Rosemont, and then here on St. Paul campus as well. That lets us cover, very intentionally, pretty much the whole range of the state of Minnesota, at least the farming regions. Also Grand Rapids, I think, is the other one. So we have had research, I think, at every single one of those, maybe with the exception of Grand Rapids. Not every crop is applicable in every region, but Kernza can be grown all the way up in Roseau. Camelina can be grown in Crookston. Winter barley is a little bit better in the southern half of the state, just because, again, it doesn't have super high winter hardiness, even though it's better than anything else. So we're taking into account soil type, region, climate. Also, the markets are different. You can't just grow a crop and somebody magically comes and buys it from you. You have to figure out where it's going to go. So things like having a crushing plant for the oil seeds turn out to be very important in shaping where we would grow them. I guess the last thing I'll say is, we've done a lot of that, but there's a lot more of that to do. And that's a big reason why we need to continue to have funding so that we can provide farmers the info that they need and let them know, is this crop really going to work for you with your combination of soils and climate and markets.
Okay, let's talk about those, the hybrid hazelnuts for a minute. Are they pest resistant? I can't recall the name of the pest that is a problem with the hybrid, or with the non-hybrid hazelnuts right now, but
Yeah,
can you speak to that?
sure. Yes. So the biggest pest is a disease called the Eastern filbert blight. Filberts is another term for hazelnuts, and they are highly resistant to that. That is, so the background of that breeding program and that those plants is that they are going back, 100 years, the result of crosses between European hazelnuts and American hazelnuts. And that's kind of a perfect marriage because European hazelnuts have large nuts, high quality nuts, nuts and high yields. Whereas the American hazelnuts have disease resistance and cold hardiness, and which the European hazelnuts don't. If you plant those here, they won't survive the winters, and if they do, they will get eaten or they'll get attacked by the Eastern filbert blight. So we're bringing together the best traits from both of those species just by cross-pollinating. And there are some, beyond that, there are some pests. Every crop is going to have some pests that attack it. I know big bud mite is one of the pests that they're working on right now, and there are a number of others. So we have entomologists on our team who are working on that, trying to figure out how big of a problem is it? Does it really damage your yield? Is it worth it to spray? Is it effective to spray? How would you spray? What are the what are the downsides? How do you do it safely? I think broadly speaking, folks in that world are really opposed to spraying, and so it's really just a matter of figuring out, are there options there? What might work? And how do you control these insects without spray? And so again, it comes back to breeding and finding lines that are more resistant, that those insects just don't like to feed on, and then they will be less of an issue.
Are they available, these hybrid hazelnuts, for sale to the consumer? And if so, where?
They are available, yeah. So there's a company, a farmer-owned company, based in Gaze Mills, Wisconsin. So all of our hazelnut work is a collaboration with folks at the UW Wisconsin, UW Madison, or just the UW system as a whole, and some people in Iowa as well as the Savannah Institute in Wisconsin. And so the company that's sprang up is based in Wisconsin. It's called the American Hazelnut Company. You can go on their website. I highly recommend, if they have their hazel snackers. Actually, I've got a bag of them right here. If they have these hazel snackers, they're really good. There's 3 different flavors of them. They also have just plain roasted hazelnuts that are tasty, hazelnut flour, hazelnut oil, which hazelnut oil is really excellent. It's equivalent to olive oil in terms of health benefits. It has an even higher smoke point than olive oil, and a delicious hazelnut flavor. So I use it frequently in salad dressings, to cook with, to bake with. It's great. So yes, that's the place to go to buy the products. If you want to buy plants to grow them in your yard, like I said, there aren't too many great sources of high quality genetics. You can find them from some greenhouse nursery businesses, but you also have to, if you plant them in your yard, you're competing with the squirrels, and the squirrels are much more attentive to when those nuts are ripe than you are. So it can be challenging to get very many nuts off of a few plants, but they are beautiful plants, so it's worth having for that in its own right.
Is this something that would be available, in a couple of years then from the U or from growers? Or are you saying it's just too early right now in the development?
To get good plants? So like I said, we are releasing our varieties pretty shortly. Our top 5 varieties should be released in the next 2 or 3 years. Initially, they are going to go to serious growers who are going to plant acres of them, for production, because that's what we think is really critical for building the industry. But it won't be long, I wouldn't think, till we get to the point where we want to make them available for home growers as well.
Excellent. Okay. Can you describe the progress being made with silphium and perennial sunflowers?
Yeah, those are digging deep into the list. Thank you for asking that question. So both silphium and perennial sunflowers are kind of, the end goal is a perennial version of sunflowers. They're both related to annual sunflowers. They're kind of similar looking plants. They make somewhat similar looking seeds that are sunflower-like, but the approach is very different. So it's a really interesting illustration of different pathways to get to the end goal. Silphium is shorthand for Silphium integrifolium, also known as cup plant. It's a native prairie plant that's found pretty much across North America, especially central North America. And that is we're working on just basically domesticating that, making it easier to work with, easier to harvest. Again, having the seeds so they don't fall off and blow away, those sorts of things. And we're doing some breeding here. The Land Institute, we're working closely with them. They're doing breeding, and we even have collaborators in Argentina who are working on that. And that's basically at this point, really early kind of basic science project of what are the characteristics that this plant has? What characteristics would it need? Is there genetic diversity for those characteristics so that we can even make a cross and expect to make some progress as we continue to breed cycle after cycle? What are the disease challenges that the plant has? What are the pest challenges that the plant has? All of those questions are ones that we are still addressing. What's the genetic diversity of all of these different populations? So really, really early days for that plant. But we have a lot of tools and we're making good progress. On the perennial sunflower side, totally different approach. There, what we did is to cross annual sunflower, Helianthus annuus, with Jerusalem artichoke, which is also a Helianthus species. So same genus, pretty closely related. Jerusalem artichoke, if you know that plant, has hundreds of flowers, lots and lots of branches, very small flowers and many of them, but it's very winter hardy. It has tubers essentially that it makes, storage roots in the soil. And every year it makes those tubers, the mother plant dies, and then the tuber grows a new plant, which is kind of cool for our purposes, and I'll explain that in a second. So what we've done is to cross Jerusalem artichoke with annual sunflower, and then kept crossing and kept crossing and kept crossing till we got a plant. I was just seeing some yesterday that basically looks like an annual sunflower that has one stem that's very straight and has one big head on the top. It's not, annual sunflower big, but it's a lot bigger than what Jerusalem artichoke started with. And that's called an ideotype. So we basically had an idea in our mind ahead of time. What should this plant look like if it's going to be a real crop? We know it needs to be perennial, but it's going to be way easier to deal with and harvest if it only makes one head that matures at the same time, as opposed to 100 heads that all mature at different times, and you don't know how to go in there and harvest it. So that crop has probably been one of the longest ones that we've worked on for the longest, decades, 2 to 3 decades on that version of perennial sunflower, with a lot of challenges, and only in the last couple of years has our breeder kind of broken through a lot of those challenges and gotten to a plant that he thinks has real potential. So again, it's a long-term game to move these plants forward and do something with them. The cool thing about the Jerusalem artichoke and how it's basically a new plant every year, even though it's kind of a perennial, it makes that root, the top of the plant dies and then a new plant grows. We think that's going to help keep yields up every year. Unlike Kernza, like I said, declines. It's the same plant, and for some reason, as it ages, it just does not want to make seed as much. But we think that this perennial sunflower, because it's a new plant every year, has the potential to keep those yields up over time, which is pretty cool.
When you say our breeder, is this one person working with Forever Green, or is this a commercial entity? Who?
Yeah, that is I really should be clearer about that in this talk. No, so we have at least 10 different crop breeders who are working on our crops. And the one who I just mentioned, the breeder on perennial sunflower, also does some work on perennial flax. We have a different one on perennial flax. We have somebody who covers Kernza, perennial wheat, perennial rye, perennial oat. We have a pennycress breeder, a camelina breeder. There's really a large number of people, pea breeder, that goes on. A large number of people who are every day they're down in a greenhouse or analyzing data or out in the field evaluating plants. This very labor intensive process to improve these crops. And so when I just now said our breeder, was really just our one perennial sunflower breeder out of a whole brew of breeders that are essential to making all this work.
Wow. Okay, are these crops, can they be successfully grown as organic crops?
Yes, in almost all cases, yes. I should rephrase that. Absolutely, any of them could be. I don't think that all of them are likely to find their place as a staple of organic farms. Some of them are much more likely to find their place as a staple of organic farms. Kernza, at this point, is largely grown in organic systems, not exclusively, but largely. And a couple of reasons for that. Organic farmers are big innovators. They like to try new stuff. They don't mind doing things differently, which is a huge asset when you're putting new crops out there. And the market is very interested in organic. So if you're thinking about what consumer wants to buy a crop that's good for the water, that's good for the climate, that's good for the soil, well, it's probably a consumer who wants to buy organic food. And so it just makes a lot of sense commercially to have the majority of that production be organic and those products be organic. And it also happens to work pretty well in an organic system because Kernza is a very good weed suppressing crop. It will outcompete the weeds, especially after the first year. So it doesn't matter that you don't have herbicides that you can spray on there. You've got another mechanism to get rid of those weeds. So yes, Kernza has found that spot. Winter camelina, an organic farmer grew it 2 falls ago and found likewise that it's really good at smothering weeds, which they really liked. And they didn't try to do the whole double cropping thing with soybeans. They probably could have. They didn't try to do it. Instead, they grew it out as a crop, harvested it, and then that gave them a window to plant a cover crop. And when you can plant a cover crop in July or August, as opposed to late September, October, you have more species that you can work with. You're going to get a much bigger crop, and especially you're going to have a much better chance of growing a whole bunch of legume biomass, large legume plants. That means nitrogen. So for an organic farmer that can't just buy tank loads of nitrogen and has to deal with manure and everything else that's challenging, an opportunity to work nitrogen fixing cover crop into your system is a huge, huge benefit economically and ecologically for them. So that one is a good fit. I could definitely see a lot of these things are actually a good fit because of the winter nature. There's just less pest and disease pressure over the winter when you plant in the fall and harvest in the spring. If you plant in the spring, those plants are growing and coming to maturity right when it gets hot, right when it gets humid. Those are the conditions that you need for diseases to develop, right when the insects are most active. So you avoid a lot of that if you grow plants over the winter the way that we're set up to do. So not to say there aren't pest challenges, not to say that there aren't some benefits to being able to use herbicides, pesticides, et cetera. We will probably have farmers managing these crops a wide range of different ways, but we've worked closely with organic farmers up till now, and we see that continuing absolutely in the future.
Does climate change factor into any of this work that you're doing?
I would say yes, in a number of different ways. We have a project right now, a research project looking at Kernza, comparing Kernza to traditional row cropping, corn, soybeans, to understand which of these systems is more resilient to climate change. So the kind of general projection for growing season climate in Minnesota in the future is that springs will be wetter, summers will be drier, and there will be more extremes. So big rainfall, rainfall events are getting bigger and fewer and farther between, fewer bigger events, more potentially damaging, more potentially stressful for the crops. And so we've got an experiment trying to understand, we think that Kernza as a perennial, it's definitely going to protect the soil. It's definitely going to deal with that drought better because it has such a deep root. But what about the flooding? What about the extreme rainfall events? How big is the effect of that root system on surviving the drought? We don't know the answers to those questions, but we're looking at them right now to understand not only is it better or is it worse, but also what are the mechanisms? Because we know the worst thing that we could throw out in a research trial is probably not as extreme as things are likely to get. just from the changes that we're experiencing with climate change. So we want to figure out those mechanisms and be building them in and strengthening them as we improve these crops and as we build systems around them. So that's a really concrete example of what we're doing. We also think that these crops are potential climate solutions because they have the potential to sequester carbon, because many of them can be grown with less nitrogen, which is a major greenhouse gas source, and because diversity gives you resilience. And right now we have a severe lack of diversity in our cropping systems. And all of these crops would be adding it. They would be adding a third crop, a fourth crop, keeping the soil covered at times when it wouldn't otherwise be. And those things are all really important for maintaining our productive capacity, infiltrating a big rain that otherwise might cause a new gully to wash out. There's lots of things, lots of ways that keeping the soil covered with diverse crops will make us stronger in the face of climate change.
Are you working with other, with farmers in other states, but also with other academic institutions, North Dakota, South Dakota, to make this more of a maybe even regional development effort? Or is it really just Minnesota now and you're waiting for the market to grow so that manufacturers or whoever buys the grains, Cargill or whatever, spurs that development in other states?
Mm-hmm.
Did that make sense?
It does, yeah. We're really doing both at this point. So, we're very cognizant that we wouldn't exist without the generous support of the state of Minnesota. And that's ongoing support. And we want to deliver value back to the state of Minnesota. That is a huge priority. And we also think that these crops have a big potential beyond that. We know the environmental challenges are there outside of our borders. We know the rural challenges are there outside of our borders. And so we're not just myopically focused on the state of Minnesota. And we have partners of all different types across the country and increasingly around the world as well. Like I said, our Silphium work is us, Land Institute in Kansas, and folks in Argentina. The Kernza work, we have a $10 million federal grant that we're working on right now that networks together dozens of people from across the country, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Kansas, Utah, beyond. So, many states involved in that. Those are mostly on the research front, but we also are, and I can't remember the 4 states, but we have 4 states where we're building up capacity in extension, in the university extension, to be able to go out and provide good information to farmers. We have farmers growing Kernza. There's kind of the 3 nodes are Minnesota, Kansas, and Montana. And it just tends to work well for farmers in Montana based on climate and the systems that they have. And so it's basically a similar ad hoc story for each of these crops, with a strong focus and center in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, but increasingly broader connections that I think are just elevating this work, finding new places where it can make a difference. There's a lot of international collaborators on Kernza, especially in Europe. A lot of interest interest in Kernza in Europe. And as these crops, I think, gain traction, we're just going to have more of that. So definitely want to see a bigger impact than just Minnesota, but in many cases, it's hard to do this stuff here. The weather, the winter, just makes it hard to add that additional crop to the rotation, to fit it in, to make it work. And so it'd actually be easier for us to go, make deals or have partnerships and get farmers to grow this stuff if we went south. Everything gets easier when you go south, but we are dedicated to doing it here where it is hard because that's where we're from. That's where our support has come from. And we just want to make sure that we are doing right by the state of Minnesota.
Is Kernza something that could be, I'm not from a farm, so this might be the wrong word, silage? Is it something animals would eat on a farm?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was the subject of my postdoctoral research. I think looking at it as a dual use crop. So, the grain is key. That's why we're developing this crop. We want to produce that grain and make all those products that I showed you. But the economics work much better for farmers if they are also getting the forage off of it. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. So when you go in here, this picture is a Kernza grain head. Down lower on this stem, right here when it's mature, this is mature, ready to be harvested. Down lower on the stem, there's probably 3 or 4 feet of straw that's still green. It's not dry and yellow like a wheat straw, it's still green. So when you go in and harvest the grain off of the seed head, you get all that straw at the same time, and that is useful as forage. It's not the highest quality forage, but it can be for a dry dairy cow, or it can be mixed into a ration with some other feed and be good for a whole bunch of different kinds of livestock. So that's the baseline. Every farmer who's growing Kernza ought to be doing that. But you can also get in, depending on the weather, you can get in the spring and you can graze or make hay, and you can get in the fall and you can graze or make hay or silage. In this case, we would call it haylage because it's made out of kind of hay. But yeah, you can make dry hay, you can make big round bales, big square bales. You could put it in a silo, you could put it in an ag bag, which are those long white snakes that you see in the landscape when you drive around. That's a way of making silage or haylage. So absolutely, this crop has a lot of potential as a, for the co-products or byproducts to be livestock feed. And that's really true out of all of our crops. Like I said, the oil seeds, you press the oil out and you have all this meal. You got to do something with it. The best thing to do with it right now is to find chickens or hogs or turkeys that will like to eat it. So yeah, there's a lot of potential for that all across the portfolio. And that's another one of those pieces that we have to line up to make this work, especially as we get to scale. We need to line up a market for all of the co-products. Otherwise, somebody's got a whole bunch of stuff on their hands that they have to figure out how to do something to do with it. And that's going to cut into the profitability of the whole system.
All right, probably time for just one more question. Does using Kernza as a farmer require the farmer then to use less additives into the soil because it's nitrogen fixing, or the farmer still has that expense?
Yeah, so just one clarification, sorry if I misspoke, but Kernza is not nitrogen fixing. Kernza is a grass. It's really good at taking up nitrogen, but it does require less nitrogen than a typical corn crop or most other annual crops. So if a corn crop these days needs 150 to 200 pounds of N to the acre, Kernza is more like 60 to 80. So right off the bat, you're saving money on the nitrogen and you're putting less nitrogen into the environment. And also because you plant Kernza once and then it regrows, you're not burning diesel fuel and spending your time or your team's time planting it again the next year. Some of our farmers have said, we love this crop because it's basically set it and forget it. We planted in the fall. I planted in the fall. I never came back and touched that field until I harvested it the next August. Where for other fields, you do a lot of seedbed prep and you plant it and you apply fertilizer and you applied different pesticides, along the course of the season before you got to harvest it. So it's a pretty low input crop. Of course, like I've said, the yields are low as well. So we need to bring those up. But that low input is really helpful in terms of profitability and in terms of the environment.
Actually, I do have just one more question. Where can the consumer buy these Kernza products? Are they Whole Foods, Trader Joe's kind of products?
All different. So if you go to Whole Foods right now, you can buy a cereal made with Kernza. It's called Climate Smart Kernza Grains. So I think if you ask an associate at Whole Foods about, I want to try the Kernza cereal by Cascadian Farm, you can pick that up. Some of the co-ops, they don't have that cereal, but they might have some of the products from Perennial Pantry. I've seen their whole grain there. I've seen some flours there. One of the more reliable sources is to go to the Perennial Pantry website. You should be able to order directly. You can also get those products that I just mentioned today. If you go down to Finnegan's Brewery or if you go to Bang Brewery, you can have a beer. If you go to Kodiak Cakes, kodiakcakes.com, I assume, you can order their Kernza pancake mix directly online. Sturdy Wheat, I think, will sell you their pancake mix online. And if you want, is it too late for me to put a link in the chat? Do I have time for that?
Go ahead.
Okay. This might look funny for a second. Try not to show you the hundreds of tabs that I have open at all times. We just put a page up
Sure.
of these products, and I can give you that link.
That would be great.
Okay, chat. Is the chat the right place to put it?
Oh, sorry, Q&A.
Put it in the Q&A, okay.
So you'll actually want to put that in the chat. That'll be the right place to put it.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Okay, I'll put it in the chat for everyone.
chat it is.
So that link will bring you to a page that lists, here it is, you can probably see it. If I'm understanding how Zoom works, you might be able to see it with my cursor over it. That link from the chat will bring you to a page that lists out a whole bunch of different products and where to get them.
Oh, that is fantastic. Since we're going to be ending here really soon, people might be able to copy and paste that into another document. But sadly, we are out of time. Thank you so much to our presenter, Dr. Mitch Hunter, you, the audience, as always, for great questions, and the OLLI program. Please join us next week at the same time for the presentation, Could Climate Change Turn Minnesota into the New Kansas? Presented by Dr. Lee Frelich, Director of the University of Minnesota Center for Forest Ecology at the university. Thanks again. Bye now.